I am South Dakota born and bred, and I had a lot of stories I could tell tonight because my family is hilarious. And I have a lot of growing up stories to tell. And I'm not kidding when I tell you my family's hilarious. Just ask my mother after the show. She'll invite you over in like 2 minutes. It'll happen. But I needed to tell a more important story, one that's been brewing and I've been rewriting for 18 years. So I'm not even telling a story really about me tonight. We're going to talk about Ryan. He's also from South Dakota. Ryan was one of my high school best friends, and possibly the most unique person I've ever had the good fortune of knowing. He dated my high school best friend, also named Sara. He was my junior prom date. He is responsible for introducing me to marijuana and apple pucker schnapps mixed with Sprite. Please don't judge me, I was in the throes of teenage rebellion at the time. I have 2 little brothers, but he was the big brother I didn't have. In fact, that's what we called each other, Lil Sis and Big Bro. To know Ryan was to be in the presence of an amazing, unharnessed pool of energy. It was infectious. Standing tall and slender at 6'3" and blessed with model good looks, every girl I knew was enamored with him. He was also ridiculously eccentric, but it was all part of the charm. A true original, his personality was so silly and endearing that even though I think most of the high school guys we knew wanted to hate him and his Powerpuff Girls backpack, they just couldn't help but want to be his friend. It was almost as if they wanted to somehow absorb his inherent cool factor through osmosis. He dyed his hair a lot. He let Sara and I dress him in drag when we were bored. He made popsicles out of leftover pickle juice in the pickle jar. Whenever we went through the drive-thru at Burger King, his favorite, he would always end his order by saying, "And I'd like that to go, please." I can't even begin to tell you how much this confuses the average. He was exceptionally kind and generous and seemingly so much older than his young 18 years. His platinum blonde hair, tongue ring, reckless driving habits, and love for alternative bands like Sublime caused a lot of people to write him off as a typical teenage delinquent. But he was about as far from punk kid as you could get. He worked 2 jobs while finishing up his senior year at high school. One at a local nursing home, and the other working with developmentally disabled adults. He loved it. He relished in being able to make people smile for a living, and he was damn good at it. May 20th, 2000 seemed like it was going to be a run-of-the-mill day. I was 16 years old and had spent the entire Saturday at my family's dilapidated, albeit charming, house in the country. My life was usually jam-packed with extracurriculars, work, and as much socializing as my parents would allow me. This particular evening, however, I was very content sitting in my living room playing Mega Man 8 on my brother's PlayStation. At 10 p.m. I received a phone call, an unexpected phone call from my friend Kenton. The conversation began with him asking if I was sitting down. I laughed, because Kenton always had a flair for drama. Why, did I win the lottery or something? His next words made my blood run cold. Sara, Ryan's been shot. The statement knocked the wind right out of me. It felt like I would never again breathe properly. Gasping for air, I choked out one question. Does Sara know? No, no one's been able to find her. I thought she was with you. No, I've been home all day. We haven't talked. Just stop trying to get a hold of her, okay? I will find her and I will call you back. After we hung up, I somehow remembered that Sara was getting home from a choir trip at around 10:30 at her high school. I immediately ran to my car. I wasn't just allowed to drive off without permission, but my family wasn't home anyway, so I didn't care. I drove the 9 miles to her high school like a girl possessed, pulled into the parking lot and sat in my car, snapping to attention whenever I heard any sound remotely resembling that of tires rolling onto the gravel. At about 10:45, the bus finally arrived. I paced outside waiting for Sara to emerge from the sea of choir kids. When she saw me, she waved and happily bounced up to me with a big grin on her face. "Hey Chica, what's up?" Looking at her, I tried to speak, but the only thing I could manage was a pathetic sob. She immediately went into mothering mode and proclaiming, "Oh honey, what's wrong?" I took a deep breath and rambled off what little information I had. The wail of anguish that left her lips will forever ring in my memory. We stood there clinging to one another, crying in the middle of the parking lot. and immediately made plans to drive to McKinnon Hospital. And by the time we called our parents to tell them as much, we were, for lack of a better term, completely freaking out. This obviously worried my parents, and they forbade me to go until morning. Panicked and angry, we decided we were going anyway, permission or no. I called my mother again to tell her as much. After a heated exchange, which my 16-year-old brain calculated as taking about an hour long, but probably took about 4 minutes, my mother somehow calmed me down and promised me that my dad would drive me and any of my friends to the hospital in the morning and that he'd have us there before visiting hours even started. Looking back, I know she was right. But at the time, I hated her and my dad so much for making us stay until morning. We eventually unwillingly complied and drove to my house to spend a sleepless night in my bedroom. My parents were nothing if not true to their word. My father was up before the crack of dawn, made us breakfast, attempted to get us to eat, took Sarah and I into town and picked up a handful of friends before making the 45-minute drive to Avera. When we arrived at 8 a.m., the day of Ryan's high school graduation, his family was out getting breakfast. We immediately accosted the first nurse we could find. Our friend Ryan is here. Is he your patient? Do you know where he is? Is he okay? Can we see him? Please? Like any good nurse, she replied, "Are you family?" We replied, "No, but she's his girlfriend and I'm his best girlfriend." To which she informed us, "I'm sorry, girls, family it's restricted to family only." There was such a finality to her tone that our only response was to grab each other's hand and nod solemnly, completely defeated. We must have looked so pitiful, so heartbroken and so hopeless that the nurse softened. "Okay, come with me. You can't go into his room, but you can look on from the hallway, but just this once, and only for a moment, okay?" Looking at Ryan in that hospital bed was one of the worst moments of my life. He wasn't breathing on his own, so a large tube was running out of his mouth. He was unconscious, but his eyes were open, rolling from side to side, and into the back of his head. His usually impeccably spiky bleached blonde hair was shaved in places where doctors had inserted brain monitoring wires. The rest of his head was covered in splotches of dried red-orange blood. He had gunpowder burns on the left side of his face, and he wasn't moving. I had to look away. This was my big bro. He wasn't supposed to be dying in a hospital bed. He was supposed to be giving me our secret handshake and making fun of me for being short. He was supposed to be walking around puffing on an unlit cigarette, even though he didn't smoke because he liked the way it looked. And he was supposed to be getting ready to accept his high school diploma in a few hours. Sitting in the waiting room, we learned from Ryan's family that Ryan wasn't supposed to make it through the night. After he was shot, his lungs had filled up with blood, and he had been without oxygen for an extensive period of time. It turned out that he and Ron, his best friend, had gotten out a .40 caliber pistol planning to shoot some birds. No one knows exactly what happened to make that gun go off. There are a lot of theories, depending on whom you ask. Some are harsher than others and blame more and have more fault. Respectfully, I stand firm that no one is right and no one is wrong. We'll just never know the truth, as Ron was the only other person there, and he doesn't remember anything. A side effect of the trauma of being a 15-year-old boy accidentally involved in the accidental shooting of your very best friend. The bullet had entered right under Ryan's jawline. His jaw had consequently been shattered, and most of the inside back of his mouth was gone. CAT scan showed that, miraculously, there was no brain damage. However, the nerve endings that connect the brain and the senses had been irreparably damaged and no longer worked. This meant that even if Ryan did live, he would be in a permanent coma. And live he did. He made it through that night, and the next, and the next. He beat all odds that first week. Sarah, myself, and many others went down to Sioux Falls as often as possible. He was later transferred out of ICU to 3rd floor McKinnon, still in his coma. Eventually, he was moved to his former place of employment, the aforementioned local nursing home, and that became his new home. Ryan was never expected to come out of his coma. However, he wasn't a vegetable. A stage 4 coma is a vegetable-like state. Ryan's coma was that of a stage 2. He opened his eyes, he smiled, and he'd look you straight in the eye. But technically, he wasn't there. He was fed through a tube in his stomach, and his lungs had to be suctioned out every hour. His brain was fully functioning, but because of the nerve damage, His senses and his brain couldn't work together, so Ryan had no idea what he was seeing, smelling, hearing, tasting, or feeling. I used to ignore what the doctors told me. I convinced myself that when Ryan looked at me with his gorgeous blue eyes, he knew his little sis had come to see him. It's a lot easier to think that way when you're 16. About a month into my final year of high school, I got a call from Sarah. Ryan's temperature was 102 degrees, and even though his brain activity was still normal, his body was giving up on him. I left immediately faced with the prospect that he wasn't expected to be alive by the time I made it to Sioux Falls. However, Ryan conquered the odds again. I sometimes wish he hadn't. Death is painful. Death is unfathomable. And death is final. But sometimes the alternative is just so much worse. For a long time, Ryan's family looked into experimental treatments and procedures at the Mayo Clinic. But at some point, it's time to face reality. Ryan's family quit looking for a miracle, and I quit visiting. I last saw Ryan around 2004. I made a conscious choice to visit him one final time and to say my goodbyes. I told him that I loved him now and forever, and that he was one of the best people I had ever known. I wish I had told him a lot sooner, but I think he knew. At the very least, I have to believe that his brain somehow got the message that day when I told him how much he meant to me. I often feel guilty about making the choice to stop visiting. I know how selfish it was. But it got to the point where I didn't want to hope anymore, because there was no point. And if I wasn't going to hope, then I wanted to walk away and remember him as the vibrant, compelling, and irresistible young man that is locked away in my memories. I hated being there, seeing the elderly nursing home residents stop by to say hello to the same amazing boy who, not that long ago, had been caring for them. I didn't want to watch him slowly wither away in front of me, a healthy, active brain trapped inside a body that had unwillingly betrayed it because of a stupid accident. So I said goodbye and I never went back. 2 years ago, if you're doing the math, that's 16 years in a coma. I logged onto my Facebook in the morning, and the first thing on my feed was a post from an old friend announcing Ryan had passed away the previous evening. I had stayed true to my decision to stop visiting, but he had never been far from my mind, and I would still speak of him often. I sat numbly staring at the screen, reading and rereading the announcement, trying to process what I was feeling. Was I sad that he was really, truly gone? Was I relieved that he was finally at peace? Some strange combination of the two? Couldn't be sure. My younger brother, Jesse, who also knew Ryan quite well, attended the funeral with me a few days later. We listened to Sublime all the way there, and we retold our favorite Ryan stories. After the funeral, there was, of course, a good old South Dakota Lutheran luncheon. And it was lovely in all the beautiful, awful ways funerals always are. We sat with friends from long ago, cheers to giant dill pickles, and told our favorite stories about Ryan yet again. We then came back to Sioux Falls and stopped at our favorite dive bar where we had a chilled shot of apple pucker schnapps, which is still indisputably terrible. And retold our favorite stories about Ryan yet again to a group of wonderful, supportive friends. The stories are important. The stories are what keep him alive. Every so often, all these years later, I sit down with a notebook or my laptop and I write out every single thing I can remember about Ryan, every name, detail of every story I have, just in case another buried memory comes to fruition, and also to vividly retain the ones I hold in my heart. I have never been the same since May 20th, 2000, and I never will be. His tragedy is a part of what has shaped me into the person I am today, for better and for worse. I will eternally be a little screwed up over the fact that one of the greatest humans I ever had the privilege of having in my life was taken away in an instant, and for no good reason. I will always have to talk about him, and I will always feel a little heartbroken when I do. But as the years press on, the joy of knowing him and the stories I continue to tell over and over again keep that pain in check. And when the heartbreak tries to creep in and taint that joy, I let my tears fall, lean back, close my eyes, and I think of what he would have to say about me letting my grief get the best of me. Don't even worry about it, little Miss Sarah. It's a beautiful day. Now grab me a pickle pop and let's go cruise around and listen to Sublime. A little 40 ounces to freedom sound good? I'll buy you some Burger King. It'll make you feel better. I'll even let you sit in the front seat, although I'm not sure you'll be able to see over the dash because you're so short. Get it? Now pop that fist up, secret handshake time, and let's go, little sis. And then I smile, look up to the heavens, and send my oh so sublime boys a hug.